lazy, so I'm going to make myself comfortable here while I speak, and I want to add my thanks to the other speakers for the invitation to this meeting, and tell you how interesting it is for me. I a little bit feel like a kind of a bastard at a family reunion in this meeting, because I come from a different world. I don't come from the political world. I come from the human rights world. And I have no engagement in party politics whatsoever. And like most human rights activists, we try to stay away from being tagged as a partisan. We should do that. Of course, the truth is something different. I mean, if you look at the board of directors of Human Rights Watch, which is the sort of the McDonald's of human rights organizations in the world, it's like the biggest and it's everywhere, and they do a lot of good work, by the way. But you know, if you look at the board of directors, you don't find a Republican there. It's all left-wing Democrats, and this is a serious problem. It's not good for human rights, because human rights should be bipartisan. We all have a stake in human rights. We all have a stake in freedom. I've spent most of the past 3 decades defending people who have been locked up and tortured, etc., for saying things and for associating in different ways. And these have been people from countries like Belarus and Russia and Armenia, and more recently I've been working more in Asia. And now I'm sitting next to somebody who has been charged and fined for what she said. And she's from Austria. And she's been convicted of this. Her conviction has been upheld by the European Court of Human Rights. And she has not been defended by any human rights organizations, I think, except for the one that I'm the president of, which is a very small group of volunteers based in Vienna. And you know, what is going on? What is going on with the human rights community, and what is going on with human rights? And this is a question that we have to ask. And I'm very happy to talk to people from conservative movements, because the progressives and the left-wing parties and the left-wing governments of the world have made such a hash of human rights. Yeah, thank you. They have made such a hash of human rights that you should pick it up. It's there. It's there, and you should pick it up, because that's what we're all here for. We are here for freedom, and when you think about what do we mean by human rights? We mean freedoms. We don't mean government handouts. We don't mean services. We don't even mean things like tolerance. Tolerance is not a matter of human rights. Tolerance is a matter of morals. But tolerance has been conflated with human rights in the same way as welfare politics has been conflated with human rights. And as a result, we have something where the human rights community wants to put her in jail for what she's talking about, and where the human rights community is upholding a kind of global governance program, which is imposing itself on democratic decisions around the world. And the human rights community is in favor of regulation and impositions on individual freedoms. So that's why we're in trouble with human rights, and I think we need new thinking, and we need a new kind of human rights movement. And it should be something from the ground up too. The way to get things done in this world is not from above. It's not from big structures. And this is I live in Germany, by the way, and I have a particular perspective on the things that I just talked about. because my wife and I, we receive a lot of social benefits. We have a handicapped child. I don't mind telling you, we get incredible benefits from the state as a result of having this handicapped child. We get money for babysitters. We get money for equipment that she needs. We get money for therapies, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And this is good. This is good. But this is a decision of the German people who want to have a very humane society. And they don't mind paying taxes for this stuff. They want to pay more taxes. I think maybe the German politicians in the room I hope they agree with this. But so this is a democratic decision, and it's not something that comes from declaring these things as human rights. So welfare politics isn't all bad. Anyway. I just want to say that in many years of, now I'm going to sort of launch into my text, that in many years of working in human rights, I have become increasingly critical of human rights institutions, international human rights institutions, especially the United Nations human rights institutions, promote the illusion that dictatorial governments willingly reform themselves in cooperation with bureaucratic human rights mechanisms. In fact, the so-called rule-based liberal international order has not resulted in liberalization. Now, if you don't believe that, just take a look around the world today. The human rights situation today is horrible. There are more and more people living with their basic freedoms restricted. We have today more human rights treaties, more human rights institutions, more human rights so-called high-level, bureaucrats. We have more UN human rights mechanisms. There's more of everything. There's a tremendous proliferation of human rights. But the human rights situation is deteriorating around the world, and there is no question about this. And it's becoming very serious. I support Brexit. I support Brexit on human rights grounds, but also because the European Union is becoming, as Margaret Thatcher observed, the future of the past. The human rights voice of the UK is lost on the international scene when blended into the dumbed-down, multilateral voice of the European Union. Listen to the statements made by the EU about human rights atrocities and the EU's limp, soft power approach. I think you get the picture with a mixed metaphor there. The top foreign affairs official of the EU, a former Communist Party member, famously said, and I quote, "I am not afraid to say that political Islam should be part of the picture." This is in Europe. And then she went on, "Religion can be part of the process. What makes the difference is whether the process is democratic or not." Well, I mean, we're all for democracy, but democracy is not necessarily the answer for human rights. You have to have constitutional protections of minority opinions combined with democracy to have human rights. Democracy itself won't protect our human rights. Aside from pandering to Islamism, doesn't she know that democracy does not guarantee individual freedom and equal treatment before the law? Now listen to this. The European Court of Justice ruled a few days ago that the European Union can lawfully suppress political criticism of its institutions and of leading figures, sweeping aside English common law and 50 years of European precedents on civil liberties, according to a news statement. Now, how different is that from what the Chinese Communist Party does? I've had the privilege to work for many years with Russian and Eastern European dissidents who fought for human rights behind the Iron Curtain, and who did they most admire? Ronald Reagan. And you know, and it was kind of funny because in the 1990s, a lot of human rights activists, including myself, you know, were running around in the former Soviet Union, and we heard about how they admired Reagan. And a lot of these American human rights activists were so horrified, and they just didn't get it. Well, they admired him because he told the truth about totalitarianism. And these people knew they had an ally, someone who understood, someone who cared, and someone with courage. And I do not have the impression that freedom fighters in repressive societies today feel the same way about the heads of state that we have today, or the same way about the European Union. Today, international human rights has been deeply infected by a kind of compromising, accommodationist, watery socialism, and it has been detached from its philosophical foundations. Why shouldn't a government restrict basic freedoms? Why is freedom important in human life? In fact, what are human rights? Few people can answer these questions. Public opinion surveys of Western young people reveal a tragic and dangerous lassitude about freedom and an ignorance about threats to freedom. If we do not have a sense of the transcendent basis for human rights and freedoms, we will not have the confidence to challenge the coercive utopianism that is on the rise today, often in the name of human rights. So, you know, let me talk a little bit now, and then this is maybe a dangerous thing to do, but I want to talk about Western civilization. This is one of your organization's themes. And let's talk about Western civilization, you know, which is, in my opinion, an idea. This is not a geographical area. It's an idea. And when we look at Western civilization, we should look at the Old Testament to begin with. And as a Jew, and during the High Holy Day season, I'm especially keen on doing this. And in the myth of the creation, or the story of the creation, we find that we are all members of the same family. Everybody on earth is descended from common parents, and for that reason we are equal. There are no natural hierarchies in the world. We are all descendant of one set of parents, and we are all morally equal, all subjects to the same transcendent moral order, and thus we owe to one another the respect due to an equal. So we have this idea of equality, which has been deeply perverted by many ideologies today. But equality is where it all starts, equality among people. And the second thing that it says that I think is, and I don't think we can really draw distinct political lessons from the Bible, but we can draw principles that can guide us toward political questions. We are free. Ever since Eve ate the apple, we have the burdensome capacity to know good from evil and to choose between these things. We all have, as Kant noticed, moral agency and reason. And with reason, we can find solutions to problems that are universally valid. We have been chased from the garden of innocence, but we must thus live with this responsibility, which Moses, just before his death, said that it was both a blessing and a curse. We have the power of choice over fate. Freedom is forward-looking. We must not wallow in the injustices of the past. And then another lesson, and I think this is especially relevant to what we've been talking about today, the question of nationhood and sovereignty, is the story of the Tower of Babel. A unified, you know what it is. Humanity was building a tower to heaven, and they all spoke the same language. And God saw that they were all united. And he saw the disastrous and arrogant behavior of a humanity that all spoke the same language. And they were building this tower, they were building a utopia. They were going to merge heaven and earth by this tower which reached up to heaven. And it wasn't just like a ladder. And in the Talmud, you find, well, this was very elaborated, and they had farms and everything on this tower. But a unified humanity is is seeking to merge with the divine by building a tower to heaven. Our differences are there to keep us in our place, to divide our power. The separation of powers thus has this biblical foundation. Federalism is good. It is in line with human nature. Centralization, Napoleonic empires, and global governance are wrong. They are against human nature. They are against God's will. And the global uniformity is against nature. And so, going on from there, we have the idea of natural rights. And then the idea of human rights is based on the idea of natural rights. But what we're experiencing today in human rights advocacy and thinking is what I call the late-term abortion of natural rights. Today, the idea of nature itself, thanks to our postmodernist friends, and the idea of human nature is a bit out of fashion, given the fad of postmodernism, identity politics, and other challenges. The United States Department of State has formed a Commission on Unalienable Rights. Secretary of State Michael Pompeo said he wanted to draw a distinction between ad hoc rights and unalienable rights. The term in our Declaration of Independence for inherent rights that cannot be denied by laws without violating our common human nature. Pompeo said the idea of human rights needed to be reattached to its foundations in natural law and natural rights. And what's really, it really gets me down. A coalition of 430 human rights, civil rights, and foreign policy and faith organizations wrote that we view with great misgiving a policy established by the U.S. government aimed expressly at circumscribing through an artificial sorting of those that are inalienable rights and those that are ad hoc rights. So they don't even want to talk about it. We are not allowed to talk about this, and this is an example of the ossifying conformism of the human rights community. They don't want to talk about it, and of course the UN doesn't want to talk about its definition of human rights. The UN High Commissioner of Human Rights, if you look at the mandate of this office, which was established in 1993, the mandate is to defend the dogma of human rights that has been established in the UN, the dogma of the indivisibility of human rights, which is, of course, a complete travesty. What this means is that the right to free employment counseling, which is upheld in it's upheld in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and in the European Social Charter. The right to free employment counseling is just as paramount as the right to life. And you can see how absolutely degrading that is to human rights. I'm about out of time here. I have a lot more to say. And I wanted to just mention, how disturbing it is working in the field of the freedom of religion today. The freedom of religion is under, in the last 10 years, there have been dramatic deterioration in the freedom of religion. About 3/4 of the people in the world live under very severe restrictions on their freedom of religion. And another interesting statistic here, 1.3 billion Muslims do not have the right to change their religion, because they live under apostasy laws that make it illegal to change their religion. In 12 countries, they face the death penalty for conversion from Islam. 5 of those countries are members of the UN Human Rights Council. And I think I can leave you with that, and I think it gives you a sense of what a mess it is with human rights theory, the idea of human rights, and human rights institutions. And so let me just close by saying that but I think we should think about natural rights by nature, by God, it's the same, in my view. And we should think about talking about human rights. And I'm a conservative too, by the way. And I'm somebody who's also swimming against the current. There is nobody. There's just a handful of people in the human rights community who are saying the things that I'm saying. We're saying them sometimes together, but more or less not. And so I'm very much feeling a sense of solidarity with many of the people who have spoken today, and that's why I appreciate being here. And I want to turn this over to my colleague Elizabeth, whom I started out talking about, who's been a victim of a terrible travesty of human rights, and whose story, I think, very vividly illustrates some of the things which I've talked about in abstract terms. Thank you very much.